Nice.
I put you here.
I want next to girls.
Yes.
Hello, how are you?
Great.
Good to see you. How's it going?
Now we're getting somewhere. This is great.
Yeah, filling up.
These are the best minds of our generation.
Throw out.
Okay.
Back here.
Oh. I think he was,
Yeah, you won't have any problems.
yeah.
All right.
You won't have any problems.
Oh, I'm perfect.
Yeah.
Take a picture. I got up my death places here.
Sounds sick.
Not actually.
Okay.
That's true. That's true.
A picture though.
Thanks for being here, panel.
If it's only one, that's fine.
Thanks for being here, everyone. I really appreciate your attendance here tonight. For those of you I have not yet met, and I think I know just about everybody here, I'm Jerry Cimino. I'm the founder of the Beat Museum. Thank you. Thank you. I am honored to be able to host this event tonight. Lawrence Ferlinghetti has had an impact on so many people, obviously everyone in this room, and we have assembled quite the panel to talk about both his life and his work. And I'll introduce our panel, and then I'll speak for another minute, and then we will have some discussions. And Neeli, at the beginning, I'm going to probably ask you to give us a background on Lawrence's life and his childhood and his travels and all of that. But before we get to that, I do want to mention, if you haven't seen it already, downstairs we have a photo exhibit by Christopher Felver.
Yeah,
And it's pretty amazing, actually.
really.
And we also have something which some of you may have never seen before. We've got quite a few magazines from City Lights magazine.
Yeah.
A lot of people know the story that prior to City Lights Bookstore, there was a magazine. There were only 5 issues published. And we've got them downstairs. And it really tells the story from 1952 until 55. And the bookstore itself started in 53. So it's a fascinating story. So assembled here today, to my immediate left, is Jack Hirschman. I think we all know him. He's a poet, translator, painter, activist. He's born in the Bronx. He speaks a dozen different languages. He's published over 50 books of poetry, essays, translations, and his masterwork, The Arcanes, is now in 2 volumes. Jack Hirschman was appointed the Poet Laureate of San Francisco in 2007 and continues to be engaged with poetry on an international level. To Jack's left, you're right, I guess, is Neeli Cherkovski, one of San Francisco's most beloved poets, the author of many books, including the first biography of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, published in 1979, also Whitman's Wild Children, covering the lives and the work of 12 different poets, Beat and Beyond. And his latest poetry collection is Elegy for My Beat Generation, which we happen to have downstairs if you're interested. How about Nancy? Next to Neeli is the acclaimed photographer, Christopher Felver. He's a filmmaker as well.
Here's your last picture.
Chris has been documenting Lawrence Ferlinghetti's life for several decades, and I mentioned his photo show is downstairs right now. His documentary, The Coney Island of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, was released in 1996. His book, Ferlinghetti Portrait, came out in 98, and Beat, his book about the Beat generation, photographs, is featuring many photographs of a lot of the Beats as well as Lawrence Ferlinghetti as well. And his most recent film is Ferlinghetti, A Rebirth of Wonder. And lastly, obviously not least, Agneta Falk.
Yeah.
She's an artist, a calligrapher, translator, poet. Agneta Falk was born in Sweden, came to San Francisco where she met and married Jack Hirschman.
She met him in England.
Wow. Thank you for correcting me. Her most recent collection is Heart Muscle, and her poetry's been translated into many, many languages. So how about a final applause?
Sorry.
That's all right.
So, as I mentioned, in another minute I will ask everyone how you met Lawrence, what it's meant to you over the years, how you've come to know him over time. and then I'll join the panel and get a few things rolling in other directions as well. But before I do that, I do want to just take a moment to talk about my experience, because frankly, there would not be a Beat Museum were it not for Lawrence Ferlinghetti. It just would have never happened.
There you go.
Thank you. The way it came about for me is in 1968, I was a 14-year-old kid in the 8th grade, and everyone who knows their history knows what a turbulent year 68 was. You know, Martin Luther King was shot and killed, Bobby Kennedy shot and killed, Russian tanks invading Czechoslovakia, there were riots in France, there were riots in California and the whole United States. Vietnam War was raging, and me and my little 14-year-old friends were looking around saying, what the hell are we inheriting here? And about a week or two after Bobby was shot, we went to school through the end of June. An English teacher, Mr. Schneider was his name, he came into our class and he read us poems from lots of different poets, but the one that got me was from Coney Island of the Mind. And to set it up, I was raised Catholic, and in the 5th grade, my parents moved. My grandmother had a stroke, and my grandparents moved in with my mom and dad, and it caused us to buy a different house because they wanted everything on one floor, and that allowed me to go to a new school. Growing up in Catholic school was not my cup of tea, and my mom said, you know, we'd be happy to drive you to the old Catholic school, and I said, no, I'll go to that public school. I can walk there, which is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. But in a few years later, in the 8th grade, Mr. Schneider reads us this poem, which I'm sure you all know, but I'll recite it to you because I love it so much. Sometime during eternity, some guys show up. And one of them who shows up real late is a kind of a carpenter from some square-type place like Galilee. And he starts wailing and claiming he's hip as to who made heaven and earth, and that the cat who really laid it on us is his dad. Moreover, he adds, it's all writ down in some scroll-type parchment, which some henchmen left lying around the Dead Sea somewheres a long time ago, and which you won't even find for a couple of thousand years or so, or at least for 1947 of them, to be exact. And even then, nobody really believes them. Or me, for that matter. You're hot, they tell him, and they cool him. They stretch him on a tree to cool. And everybody after that, they're always making models of this tree with him hung up. And they're always crooning his name. And they're calling him to come in and sit in on their combo as if he is the king cat who's got a blow, or they can't quite make it. Only he don't come down from his tree. Him just hang there on that tree looking real petered out and real cool. And also, according to a roundup of the late world news from the usual unreliable sources, real dead. That was my introduction. Nice. So Lawrence Ferlinghetti. So I go off to high school, meet a girl, fall in love, go off to college, meet another girl, fall in love. Just as I'm graduating college, that girl dumps me. I got no prospects, I got no money, no place to live. So I do the only thing that any self-respecting kid at 22 years old would do in a situation like that. I started writing poetry. And after a while, I thought maybe I ought to go buy some poetry books to see what other people have done.
Right.
So I wind up at Towson Books on York Road in Baltimore, Maryland. And I'm thumbing through all these various books, and bam, off the shelf comes Coney Island of the Mind, number 5, Sometime During Eternity. And it's like, oh my God, that's that book of poems from when I was in the 8th grade. So I bought it with my last $1. I went by a week later and picked up another poetry book right on the same shelf, sitting right next to it, black and white cover, Jack Kerouac's Scattered Poems. I bought that with another $1 that I scraped together. And a week later, I found Howl on that same shelf. And I finally realized at that point, these guys know each other, and there's something going on out in San Francisco. A week after that, I found my first Kerouac novel, Desolation Angels. I met my wife, and I got my first job with IBM, first real job, all in the same week. So my life changed rather dramatically. So had it not been for Coney Island of the Mind, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. So I just wanted to relate that to you guys because for me it's an important part of what we do here. So now, if I can indulge, thank you, folks. Thank you. So now what I'd like to do is ask Neeli to take it over and tell us about Lawrence Ferlinghetti's life at the beginning, if you would. Tell us, level set us, you know, where he was born, went to school, and his travels, and even his war experience, if you want to talk about that.
Okay. Let me see. It's funny, I was racing through my mind last night. Or maybe it was in the garden. No, it was on my deck today, on the redwood deck, looking at the garden, trying to whistle up some birds, and none of them came. Because usually, I get enough water in me, I can almost whistle. Something like that, not very much. And sometimes the birds come. And I was thinking about Lawrence. I think what I'm going to say, because I'm going back east to do a thing. They gave me 1 hour to talk about Lawrence and read my own poems, so it's really weird, you know. 1 hour. So I thought there's little tidbits, because there's so much to say. You know, he was born in Yonkers in 1919, the son of a Italian immigrant from Lombardy, Mr. Ferlinghetti, and a wife who was part Sephardic. The family came from, they came to the New World, to Curacao on an expedition from Amsterdam, because they're Dutch Jews. The Mendes Monsantos, they're all over the Mediterranean. The Monsanto chemical was part of that. There are black Monsantos, there are black Mendeses, there are Latino Mendes, Monsanto, whatever. And when I was doing the research on the Ferlinghetti biography, back in '78, I wrote the American Jewish Archive. I said, is there anyone named Mendes Monsanto in the United States? They said there's a Louis Mendes Monsanto in San Bernardino, California, where I come from. 97 years old, 2 blocks from my parents' house, member of the synagogue, and his son was our TV repairman. Bingo. I called him up from North Beach. Well, yes, I know I have a famous relative up in San Francisco who's a poet. I'm 97 years old. I was born in St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands. And there was another relative in Bolinas. And I don't know, you know, I should know exactly what the relation is, but it's close. I mean, you know, probably a cousin or an elder cousin or something. There was a woman pretty well known who Lawrence knew, who was one of his relatives also. And so that's a little tidbit. Another one is that the older brother, Clement Ferling, and I'm going to explain that, not Ferlinghetti, there's Harry Ferling, Clement, and there's another brother. I'll explain why that happened. He was the assistant warden of Sing Sing Penitentiary. So Lawrence's elder brother. That's a little known fact. When the father came to the U.S., he became a real estate auctioneer, something like that. And to make a long story short, or non-existent, he changed the name from Ferlinghetti to Ferling. So Lawrence grew up thinking he was Ferling and found out when he went in the Navy he was actually a Ferlinghetti. When he was born, his father had died maybe 8 months before or something like that. The mother went out of her thing and went to a institution in Long Island where Alan's mother Naomi would be many years later. And so Lawrence went with an aunt from the French part of the family, and she took him to Strasbourg. He spoke French for the first 3 years. They came back to the U.S. They lived with a family called the Bislins in Bronxville, New York. Now, I visited the house. The Bislins were long dead. I visited the house, and it was a real mansion. They lived on the 3rd floor. One day, the aunt was a housekeeper. One day, the aunt left, and she left Lawrence at like 5 years old. The Bislins took him in, and Mr. Bislin, he loved Mr. Bislin, and there was a stepsister, or, an adoptive, the family had a daughter. And I had many talks with her, and they got along very well. And the father would say, "Well, young man, Mr. Bislin, can you read a poem? I'll give you a quarter." And he had a big library. He was related to the founder of Sarah Lawrence College, Angela Hearn, the great Japanese scholar. So it was a literary family in many ways, although he himself owned an auto dealership, Mr. Bislin. Hope you're following this. They raised Lawrence. He went to a very fancy academy, boys' academy. I forget the name of it, and graduated, went to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and got a degree, his BA degree. He got his MA at Columbia. He then went to, then he went in the Navy, and of course, many of you know he was commander of a landing craft in Normandy, and 45 days later he was in Nagasaki after the bombing, and he said, "It made me an instant pacifist." So that's the roots of his anarcho-pacifism. He then attended the Sorbonne. He had a place in Montparnasse that was $45 a year to live in. And he just loved he would see Sartre and de Beauvoir and all the other existentialists, and never approached them, but he would see them in the Mabillon and Brasier, what's it called, famous Flip, where Picasso used to hang out. But he didn't really know people there. He did know George Whitman, who would open the Mistral bookshop, and change the name later to, once he found out that Sylvia was long gone, who had the original Shakespeare Company, he would change it to Shakespeare and Company. They were very good friends. And then Lawrence would buy the Livre de Poche along the banks of the Seine, the little paperback books. Then he gets his degree, and it was on the poet in the city. He says, I kind of imitated Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. Sorry, Jack. And I did see some notebooks where he had cantos, He loaned me one of his notebooks, and I left it in a little Chinese donut shop on Grand Avenue. And it took me 4 days to find the donut shop, and I finally did. Imagine if I hadn't rescued that. So he comes back to New York, and he had been in Greenwich Village on his trips home from the Navy, and he loved it, Wasn't much of a jazz person, but he loved it. There's E. Cummings living on Patchen Place. There's the memory of Edna St. Vincent Millay. He certainly loved Cummings, by the way. And when he came back, he also had the Apollinaire and Jacques Prévert in his mind. Those two especially. Apollinaire, of course, the pre-surrealist who wrote pretty straightforward poetry, verging on the fantastic. And then Prévert, who was a populist poet in French. Yeah. And that is what Lawrence would be. And so he is in New York. I don't like it here. And he gets on a train. He comes to Oakland, takes a ferry boat over the bay, and he's looking at the city, and he says, it looks probably like what Tunis looks like when you're coming from Malaga or Marseille or something, and the waves. And he said it was very romantic, because there weren't any big towers. There was a Coit Tower. There are all these white buildings. He gets off the ferry building. And it's very simple. He walks up Market Street. He turns a right at Montgomery. He walks through the Canyons of the Dead. And he makes it to North Beach, and he smells the fresh-baked bread, and he whiffs the aroma of the wine, and he sees the old Italians making salami sandwiches and all that kind of stuff. And he walks by Fagoni Hardware, and he says, this is some kind of little Paris, like a little drop of Paris. So I'm going to stay here. He's still Lawrence Ferling. He writes an incredible article in the Chronicle under the name Lawrence Ferling. He gets a hold of them. Have a PhD or a doctorate at a university, the Sorbonne, whatever he did. And he writes this incredible article about the refugee murals at Rincon Annex and the attack by the HUAC, House Un-American Activities Committee, on them. And so even before Howell, before anything else, he was involved. Then he takes the name Ferlinghetti back. He's in an Italian neighborhood, and you know, I met his brother Harry, and they had apparently visited him when he was 17, but he doesn't remember registering that they were Furlings. It was when he was in the Navy that he found out. So he did take the name back. I have to say that the current Poet Laureate of the state of California, who served as George Bush's NEA guy, Dana Gioia, wrote in a book on American Italian writers that Lawrence Ferlinghetti is a fake Italian. There is no Ferlinghetti name in Italy. I mean, all over Lombardy is Ferlinghetti. So it just shows you gotta watch out sometimes with people and their histories. So he meets George. What's his last name? George. City Lights.
George at City Lights.
Jim
What?
Martin.
George Martin. Yeah, I gotta get, you know, Jim Martin.
Peter Martin.
Peter Martin.
Yeah,
That
He
was
meets
the
Peter.
son of Carla Chester.
Right.
you're
He meets
right.
Peter, and
Great
Peter.
anarchist was killed
Yeah.
in the
Whose
street.
mother was Sabina
Yeah.
Gurley Flynn,
Ah.
sister of Elizabeth.
Peter had this great magazine, and Lawrence loved it, but he loved it for a particular reason. If you read his poetry, you see the little Charlie Chaplin man appears several times in his books, and he loved Charlie Chaplin. And when I got to know Lawrence, I had gone into City Lights in 1965, and I was a kid, I was like 15. My parents were visiting North Beach because they were North Beach people in the 30s at the old Black Cat Cafe, and their friend Henry Lenoir opened Vesuvio's, and their other friend worked there, and then another friend lived on Montgomery, and was even here in the 70s when I was here, a guy named Jose Ramis, and the other guy was Luke Gibney, the guy who was the bartender. So they're old North Beach people. So, what was my train of thought on that?
The magazine.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, the magazine. So Lawrence and also anyway, I got to know. I was in the basement and I said I edit the Black Cat Review, and Lawrence said, "Oh, is that printed on red ink?" And then we talked for a while, and he gave me Coney Island of the Mind signed. He gave me a copy and sent me on my way. And that was when I was 15. And then years later, I'm in the Trieste, and Harold Norse, who has a book from in the Pocket Poet series, introduced me to Lawrence, and we started going out to the movies together, the Surf Theater in his old van, and to the Times Theater in Chinatown. And one day we saw City Lights, and he just sat there guffawing, and he was unbelievable. And I'm sitting there listening to him go, oh, and I'm thinking, my God, this is the great beat poet who I grew up on, my first literary hero. And the point was, he was just so country simple, so open-minded, so open-hearted, and not just to me, to street people, to the young poets. He began reading with us at the Little Fox Theater. He took me down to Big Sur a couple times to his cabin at Bixby Creek, finally giving me the key and insisting I go down there. Just stay away from the coffee houses in Carmel. Because he knew I would sneak up to the highway and hitch a ride into town. One time I was on my way down there. I told Lawrence this, he got a kid. I was on my way down there. Tell me when and this guy picked me up. This guy with a sweet-back mustache. It was about 3 weeks after Dan White had been killed Moscone. And I was a friend of Moscone's. I played cards with Moscone. He owed me $20. He still owes me. And I worked for him. So this guy picked me up and he said, I'm a San Francisco policeman. I'm going to a convention in Carmel. He took out his badge. Then he took out, while he's driving, a picture of his 3 children, his wife. Well, I knew what was coming when they do that. You know, so he takes me to a fancy restaurant. I said, I'm heading to Big Sur. Oh, come on, you'll have a great dinner. We'll have prime rib and merlot and great stuff and sherbet. We ate dinner, and then he looked at me and he said, listen, I don't want to come off like some kind of faggot, but do you want to spend the night? And I said, well, no, I got to get down to Bixby Canyon. It's 15 miles. So he drove me to Highway 1. There was a local Carmel policeman, and they start talking, and I just start hitching. And this van that reeked of pot stopped and picked me up, and I mean reeked. You could have carved it out of the air. And they let me off at what, Kerouac describes it in Big Sur, the horror of Bixby Bridge at 10 at night, because that's what it is. It's just, 400 feet down, the big WPA bridge, and then you walk down this road. So I started walking down, and the key fit, and I got in, and I couldn't find the damn cabin. And nothing says Ferlinghetti's place. It's all weeds and wasps, and the wasps wear armor. I found out. So this woman walks along. She's a woman who had explained to Alan years earlier the name of every plant in the canyon, which he put in a great poem, Bixby Canyon, Ocean Path, Word Breeze. I found the cabin. And yeah, that was the first time. I went on my own the first time, yeah. And it was amazing because it fit Ferlinghetti like a glove. You get no heat, no water, you cook outside. I said on Sunday at the Correct, there was nothing like watching Lawrence make hobo coffee in driving rain. It was amazing. So when he was there, he'd have the cabin, and there's guests like me would have the little Buddhist temple right next to it, which is on stilts, next to a little concrete trout farm, and it has a tatami mat in. And then when you have to go use the bathroom, there's the Buddhist anarchist temple. That's what he called the outhouse. And it's signed T. John Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and you put your name there too. Well, of course I did. And the original cabin was down the ways. The actual cabin that Kerouac stayed in, and it was bought by Denver and Betty Peckinpah. Denver's the brother of Sam. So I go over there, and you have to watch every movie Sam Peckinpah ever made. And by the time you left, 400 people have been killed on screen. But Lawrence needed that. He's just, it's why, that kind of mind that Lawrence Ferlinghetti had, he could have built the Benahoff Tower Salesforce. It could have been him, and thank God it wasn't. He just kept one little place. He was smart. And that's why I think he was able to keep the publishing company. So on Fillmore Street, 1955, he goes in to hear these young poets read. Nobody knew them. And he hears Ginsberg read Howl. A lot of you know the story. And he said the same thing Whitman said after he read Leaves of Grass. He said, I greet you at the beginning of a great career. And then he added, when do I get the manuscript? A couple days later, when Alan gave it, and then Lawrence, Jack knows this, everybody who's been with Lawrence knows that he edits. He doesn't just publish you. He goes through the poems, and he went through with Alan, the poem, and Alan knew right away. Alan told me, he knew right away, oh boy, this man is king. Now, we don't have to, we understand he didn't take on the road. Well, he didn't like it, at that time, I think, knock on wood, he probably felt he should have, and he didn't want naked lunch, but everybody has their thing, So, but he knew what was there with Howell. So they had, the juvenile, Lawrence points out, well, it was the juvenile division of the police that arrested Shig Murao, who I call the beat saint, if any of you knew Shig. He was a great man, and he was a beat saint. And he kept that place so simple. I mean, we used it as a library, frankly. You go in, you could take books, you bring them back, and whatever, And the problem was too many people were taking out books and selling them next door at Discovery Books. So Shig got sick, and Lawrence hired this guy, Big Joe Wahlberg, who was big. I saw him take a guy once and shake him down, the books came out. I'm not kidding. And Lawrence is standing there, Joe, look what Joe did. One night at Lawrence's, it was Thanksgiving. Now you're going to really hear And Gregory Corso put his hand in the he put his hand in the carcass of the turkey and swung it like this and then threw it against the wall. Lawrence's turkey, and Lawrence is, I mean, you know, for crimini's sake. And so I picked up Gregory and pushed him against the wall, and Lawrence says, "Boy, I like what Neeli did to Gregory." So I'll end this but he became this great institution here. His heroes were Kenneth Rexroth, the great Kenneth Rexroth, who wrote some of the greatest poetry imaginable. And there's a new book out where it takes from his collected the mountain poems. And the last great poem he wrote was on Flower Wreath Hill. And Lawrence loved him, and he had soirees at his house. Lawrence will tell you he learned so much from Kenneth Rexroth. And he wrote a great poem at the same year as Howell, "Thou Shalt Not Kill." You know that.
Well, terrific.
You know, it ends, it's about, "You killed him, Maxwell Bodenheim, Edna St. Vincent Millay, you killed him, blah, blah, blah."
It's about
All
Dylan Thomas.
And Dylan, it's mainly about Dylan, yeah. "You killed Dylan Thomas," and then at the end he says, "You killed him, and your goddamned Brooks Brothers suit, you son of a bitch."
Yeah, it's a terrific political poem.
Yeah. The other hero was Kenneth Patchen, the long-suffering Kenneth Patchen, who was a hero to many of us, who wrote the Journal of Albion Moonlight, Memoirs of a Shy Pornographer, which Lawrence published, 2 books in the Pocket Poet series, Selected Poems and Poems of Humor and Protest. But New Directions, Lawrence's friend James Laughlin was the main publisher, and you got to say that Laughlin was who had plenty of money and could do a lot more. Laughlin was a hero to Lawrence. Unfortunately, they had problems at the very end. But Lawrence is a very complex person. I'll end this by saying one of the poems I love the best is a poem he wrote after going to the Spoleto Festival. He published it in the City Lights Journal. And it's to Ezra Pound. And it's funny because Pound, we know what Pound collaboration and all this kind of thing, and Lawrence is about as far left as you can go. But he wrote this poem about being at Spoleto, and it was very much like Lawrence when he reads. Pound is frail and old, he's in his mid-80s, and his lover, she didn't help him, he couldn't get up, so somebody brought the mic to his face and he started reading very, very low, they could barely hear him. "What thou lovest well remains, the rest is dross. What thou lovest well is thy true heritage." And he went on, and it got louder and louder. And Lawrence writes about this, and he writes about the audience as completely spellbound, including him. He had tears in his eyes. He describes his own tears. And then at the end, the words are wafting over the wind. And it's just the primacy of the poem itself over everything, even over a ruined and tragic figure like Ezra Pound. And for that alone, I mean, I love Lawrence on so many levels, but that's one level, you know. Yeah, a book with City Lights would be nice, but what are you going to do?
Well, that was pretty magnificent, I gotta tell you.
Why don't you just let it go on?
Who dares to follow that?
Hirschman.
But whenever we want to Lawrence's voice, we can.
You do a great mimicry, or a good Lawrence.
Well, okay, one last one. I'm in the Trieste, and Lawrence is sauntering by. Lawrence, if you know him, he saunters. He doesn't so much walk, his hands, and he owns the street, and he's walking by and sees me in there, and he comes in and he orders a cappuccino. I've got one, and he says, "I always wanted to ask you. I published that poem of yours in the City Lights Review 25 years ago. What did it mean? Well, the poem was called To the Ferry, F-E-R-R-Y. But it was actually about a fairy, F-A-I-R-Y, the humankind, and who actually lived with me and was gone for 3 hours, and his 3-hour missing made me write this 3-page poem about the ferry boat. So Lauren said, what does it mean? I explained it, and he said, oh, if I would have known that, I never would have published it.
That's great.
So, anybody want to raise their hand?
Yeah, I'll say something.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
I met Lawrence in '66. I came out here from Florida. That's where I was going to school, came out. And a friend of ours, Robert Newrock, had given me the Coney Island of Mind. And he was in his back pocket, and he pulled it out, and he said, you should read this. Wow. So I come out, and I go to City Lights, and Lawrence is there. And so I was just dumbstruck, you know, because I'd taken a test to get into Cranbrook, and they gave me the this poem to translate. Man, it was right out of the Partisan Review. I had no idea what it was saying. Absolutely none. So I tried to do the thing, and I mean, so poetry was something else, and then Coney Island of Mind, that sort of made sense, you know, that's a sensical a stance to take poetically. So, you know, I was just in awe of Lawrence, and so 10 years later I came back, and on May Day, I meet Neeli on Grass Street, and it's a spaghetti factory. There's a huge reading. Mr. Hirschman was also there, and so was Mr. Kaufman, and everybody was there. Gregory, sweet Gregory was there, and so that's how I sort of met Lawrence, and then I started taking a few pictures here and there, and then he said, why don't we go over to this, there was a art thing down at the marina, head by Bowen, is that his name, Bowen?
Yeah, Bowen.
Michael Bowen. So we go in, and Lawrence has a couple things up there, and I think it's like, it's really his first exhibition, sort of in the public arena. And so we go up, and Bowen is sitting there at the table, and he says, oh, Lawrence, I really like those pieces. Now, there's just one problem. I've had the police come, and he opens the drawer, and there's a gun in there. And as we're leaving, Lawrence says, boy, art is really exciting, isn't it? Poetry's so dull. So, I thought, this is my kind of guy. You know, I mean, it's straightforward. So, we made a lot of, we made a few trips together, went to Nicaragua after that, and we did that book, and we went to Ireland for the Dublin Poetry Festival, and went down to Sligo to Yeats's situation, and then we went over to the Berlin Poetry Festival, and so I took Lawrence, you know, into, well, there are 3 places he didn't like. First we went to Die Bruck to see the art. Well, I understand that most people who were in World War II were not happy with the Germans if you're on the American side. And Lawrence was definitely like that. So we went to Paragon, and there was this beautiful, there's a whole room in there of Babylon, and up on the roof are these gorgeous cats. You know, this is the tiles they took back, and it was absolutely gorgeous. Lawrence is nonplussed completely about that. There's a bar in Paris, I mean in Berlin, called the Paris Bar. It's got art on the ceiling. It's got art. Every German artist has ever been in Berlin since the World War II. Lawrence was nonplussed about that too. That meant nothing to him. But this international festival of poets, everyone adored him. And he said the poem, he read the poem about Alan is dying. And it was really, you know, because Alan was dying. And so that was a trip we made once, and then we went back over to see George in Paris. And then we were supposed to be on the plane together, and all of a sudden Lawrence wasn't there. Well, of course not. He wanted to stick around with George. But I was worried. I got on the plane. I don't know what the hell happened to it. But I want to say one thing just quickly about Terry Allen. I met a long time ago. Terry Allen's a great artist, and he said he came here in the early 60s, and he had no bread, and he was fascinated by the Artaud book that Lawrence had there. And he went up to Lawrence and said, listen, I don't have any money. Do you mind? And he said, of course not. Take it. And that was the generosity of spirit that Lawrence always had. And so when I heard that like about 5 years ago from Terry, I thought, well, this is why I made a couple films on Lawrence, and that's why we love him. But he's always been quite a pater familia to me, as Rex Roth was to him. And so we've always, his situation, what he looks at, things are funny. And to me, that's very appealing. So we've always gotten along just fine. And it's funny, you know, you travel with somebody day in and day out, and never have any time to say, man, I gotta get out of here about 5 minutes. You know, give me 5 minutes. Never once was there any of that kind of feeling. And we were there for 3 weeks once, and 10 days on another trip. And so I mean, Lawrence is, you know, one of the sweetest cats who ever walked the planet. He's like these two guys. Really. So anyway, that's my short story. I mean, another one, but let someone else go. Let Jack go. Let Jack go. Yeah.
Let me just ask this thing. How many people are at the Corridor Oratorium on Sunday who are here now? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. Well, most people here weren't. Well, I can tell you, I think I'll read something that I wrote there because it describes my life with Lawrence. I will say just one thing that's not in the poem that I'm going to read, that I was the one who did the Arcto anthology that Chris was just talking about. A friend of mine at that time, Anais Nin, wrote to Lawrence and suggested me, and he picked it up and said, would you put together a few translators? I edited the book and translated a bunch of it too, with David Rattray and some other translators, and the book came out. And Lawrence, I just wanted to mention this because it's not in the poem that I'm going to read, but it's that house. There's 2 houses now. I didn't realize is the one that you referred to at the end down in Vicksburg. The smaller one, is that the one where you said Kerouac stayed in?
No, that's in another area. It's about, a quarter of a mile away.
Oh no,
There's a little house, and then there's a, yeah.
Oh no, well then in my first marriage, Lawrence gave me the house for my first wife.
That was it.
And my children. And we went down there and stayed over the weekend. That was one of his gifts. It was a gift. It was a gift to, for the anthology. That was a part of it. I have to say these. I have to tell these things. All right. And a couple of wonderful things. He said, you know, we'll give you 500. I was going to give him the book free. They did the book free. I said, no, we'll give you $500. You paid $500 to do it. So I thought, well, that's rather nice. I'll give, you know, share it. There were 3 other translators there. So I said we'd share the $500. But the reason was, the reason was that that book has been published so many times, how many editions since then, which I received nothing from, you know, there's nothing from that. But I must say, he had to pay, you know, the French, the company that publishes in France, the French publisher. Gallimard, that's right, they have to pay Gallimard for each one. But the one story that I must say, I cannot refuse this. You won't hear it in the poem I'm going to read right after. But when he went, I was up in the room with him, and he was choosing the books for the book Front Lines. And he said to me that they said, we'll publish the book, yes, but I don't want these 2 poems. These 2 poems were New York, New York, and Mother. Now, Mother is Aggie's, the poem she loves the most, but more than that, I like the poem. I like the poem very much, too. But I yelled so much that if these codes were not in that book, then there was no book. That when I went downstairs, at the front desk, they said, "What happened?" They had heard it. Anyway, could I have that?
You want that one or this?
No, that's right there, the back. Yeah, let me, since there are a few people who haven't heard this, it's, I think it's a decent arcane, and I'll read it here. It's called the Ferlinghetti Arcane. Let me just put it together here. I think I can. Here it is. One. Excuse me, just a sec. 5. 4. This is the one. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. 1, 2, 3. 4. 5. Okay. All right, here it goes. Well, the Ferlinghetti Arcane. 1. Caro compagno. Let's see.
Wait a minute before.
Oh, excuse me.
It's a
Oh,
child
yeah,
of the dog.
It's
It's a child of the dog.
it's very important because into the room has just come a very dear friend. Also, Dimitri Karayeva.
That's a child dog.
The Ferlinghetti Arcane. 1. Caro compagno, let's see. How many years since we first touched base? 60, I believe, unless Alzheimer's already begun playing tricks on me. You'd come east early in 61, riding the crest of the beat wave. Jack and Alan were out there drumming on as a new American poetry. But you'd already been international in both Atlantic and Pacific Ocean theaters, chasing submarines in the war. And after North Carolina U on the GI Bill, getting your PhD in Paris at the Sorbonne. That's one of the sin harmonics, always reverberant between us. You, the consummate consonant and vowel uttered, and I, the same vowel at the end of the next syllable, but only an unsounded echo barely heard, still being in the university. You'd gotten your degree and got out of it early on, and I gotta hand it to you. You never did go back to Bougieville, but stayed as independent as you could, creating the first paperback bookstore in the land, opening a bunch of doors so that worlds of people could realize San Francisco is one of the most priceless cities on the planet. Still a city, small town, like a kid at a window somewhere dreamed of way back when. And of course, got into trouble with the law after you published Allen Ginsberg's Howl, becoming activist poet publisher in defense of language, your own poetic voice with its lilting whine of a drawl, distinctive in a way, memorable, and therefore imitable. Ah, Fratello, you should have been at those many tables in Vesuvio Specs and the Cafe Trieste when your poet biographer Neeli Cherkovski had us all doubling over, as you would have also, at his almost perfect, always slightly envious but ever affectionate impersonation of you. Because you already were a legend by the 70s, encircled by a transparent but unbreakable wall of image with a capital I, which only Jack and Alan otherwise possessed. Populist in poem, paint, and emotion, you critiqued my work for being too arcane and esoteric, while you stole from all the poets you loved, giving their phrases new context. A master husker of American corn, ironic deconstructivist, of the rhythms of patriotic cliche, you had a dream and would not go gentle into that war zone. Even after I joined the Communist Labor Party in 1980, and you'd be chuckling, calling me Black Jack Stalinsky, till the Soviet Union fell under the US threats a decade later, e l'Italia cominciava ad entrare nelle nostre vita fisicamente, poeticamente. We kept that sin-harmonic glyph of friendship intact to the addition of Artaud, The Death of My Son David, Your Populist Manifesto, eruptions of Central American poetry that the Rocky Dalton Cultural Brigade translated, which you published for that ongoing cause of liberation. If there were any brushes between us, they were paint, too. These years later, this millennial decade, when we've become closer out of a brotherly need in a time of great anti-Semitism against Salam Aleikum as well. And with Alan gone, who was a light, and also I imagine a heavy cargo for you, we know there's no God to judge or forgive us. There's only this singing to life, what comes from the human immensity of death. And that's why putting into the computer file of the Revolutionary Poets Brigade anthology, At Sea, the finest poem you've ever written, and you wrote it at the age of 90, I have a sense of the greatness of the victory over time and despair and authentically true poetry embodies. So right on, young timer, you who oppose the wars in Vietnam, the Gulf, the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Right on, first baseman in your 9th decade, with legs still able to give my vodka-leaden ones a run for the bases. Well, sure, because I ride my bicycle every chance I get. To see you a few days ago in your Francisco Street flat after a bout with staph infection, who drilled you one in your heart socket when they were fitting a pacemaker in. Though the antibiotics make you tired, your complexion's still rosy, and I know all you want to do is get up and go downstairs and drive to your China Basin studio, where alone you never are. So Quarter Shore, we'll give you one more standing O, big guy. Quarter Shore, let's sing the Bella Ciao, son of Carlo Ferlinghetti di Brescia, and Clement Salvatine Mendez Monsanto, your Sephardic Jewish mother. Together they gave you your mouth and fitted you with some terrific genes and prophesied pacemaker, or no pacemaker at all. Our boy will live till the raven turns white. 100 anni, mamma mia, auguri non Ferlinghetti, auguri.
Having their long stories. Mine spans only 20 years. Wow. Of course, I knew of Lawrence when I lived in England as a poet, but he wasn't a particularly important poet to me. In those days, Allen Ginsberg was a big man, and I met him in London several times in Bernard Stone's bookshop. So I have to say, I'm going to sort of go to the very end now. In the last few days, listening to people reading Lawrence's work, I've really come to appreciate him in a way I never did before. As much, I have to say. And it's lovely to hear everyone reading in a different voice as well. But anyway, I'm going back again. So I met Lawrence about 20 years ago when I moved here, or maybe before I moved here through Jack, or Café Trieste. But then in year 2000, we were on the same tour, Pull My Daisy through Italy. And yeah, were you there? I can't really. Pull My Daisy.
Pullman.
Yeah, Pull My Daisy, but I think of the film Pull My Daisy, Hera. But we were actually there together with Lawrence another time. However, so on this bus were Ira Cohen, Marty Matz, Ed Sanders, Anne Woolman, Jack myself, and a lot of Italian poets. But Lawrence was sitting right in front, quite wisely, because at the back it was Marty Matz guzzling brandy and said, "Oh, what's the matter? No, there was something wrong. We were not as groovy as one." He's dead now. Ira Cohn is dead. Ed Sanders is dead. Oh, shut! Because his wife died. Excuse me, but she was on the back. Forgive me, Ed. His wife died. Yeah. No, it's not too long ago. How could I make that mistake? Anyway, I did. So it's extraordinary. And anyway, Lawrence was at the front, and this tour took about 10 days, and it was very intense on this Pullman, and reading every night. And I then came to appreciate him in a much more, if you like, private way, and discovered what a lovely, gentle soul he is, and still is. And then many other times, or not so many other times, twice I think we've been in Italy together. And one time in Brescia, this was in 2005, and he was knocking on his father's door, so to speak, where his father used to live. And an elderly couple lived there, and for some reason the police came and arrested him. And of course that was an extraordinary story. So the next day, big headlines, famous American poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti arrested. However, it wasn't as bad as it sounds, but of course Francesco Conce, impresario of the art movement Fluxus, had of course arranged it all because it was fantastic publicity. But of course, we all believed it and it was kind of a bit shocking, How could they arrest this poor man? And who would arrest Lawrence Ferlinghetti or a man looking like him? Who's,
But the old couple didn't know.
No, but it was a setup. Not that they actually were just a little bit worried, like maybe you would be if somebody looking like this knocked on your door. However, so Francesco Conce had done it because he was one of those. He was in the Fluxus Morning. He was very mischievous, and so is Lawrence. In fact, he has a lot of mischief in him. And the next day, there was this big day of Lawrence coining the verb fluxare, etc., to flux or not to flux, like a storm. And Jack was even dragged up on the stage and got involved with, painting all these things. But before one got into this place, there were thousands of people outside, believe me, and Lawrence was frightened. He did not want to get out of the car. People knocking on the door, and I had to just go away. He really didn't like all that publicity. He's not actually, I found, somebody who seeks a lot of attention. He's actually, what I found, very shy. And in later years, I got to know him on a very lovely level, actually, in the sense that, because, he's just a bit fragile and he doesn't come out very much. So we had this little arrangement that I go and cook dinner and invite a few people, friends, or he will ask, do you want blah, 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 etc. But it's a lovely time because we sit around the table and argue. Lawrence and I against Jack Hirschman. But then maybe it explains because Lawrence and I have birthdays 2 days apart. You don't have to say happy birthday, it's okay. This Lawrence is 100th year. I'm quite pleased to, I really don't even want to celebrate it. Actually, another time, I'm jumping a bit here because he was with us in Italy also. We were in Salerno. We actually moved into an enormous hotel, which we were the very first guests in that hotel, which was a very freaky experience, if you imagine. white, what do you call those sconce floors? I suppose. Yeah, but that tiled floors. Yeah, but it was very sort of black and white, and there was just us on a whole, in the whole hotel. That's how it felt. I think a few others came in there, but we had a lot of fun. But in fact, I had most fun with this chap. This was like an extraordinary time, and that story has to be told. And Lawrence, was that the same time as Lawrence? Yes, it was. So we go to this cafe, we're all sitting outside, and he and I go to the bookshop Feltrinelli. It's a thing, I think.
Bookstore.
Yeah, it's a chain of bookstores. And then on the walls are these photographs, and I sort of think, oh God, they look very familiar. Did I come back and get you? Yes, I did. They look very familiar. I came and get them, said, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. All over it.
They made wallpaper
And they had actually
for 13 stores.
stolen actually his imagery, blown them up, and of course, smart man, he cashed in on it because he was in stores all over Italy.
They paid a lot of money for that.
Yes, stores over Italy. Yeah, you don't have to tell them how much you got for it. I never got any percentage for spotting it. Anyway, that was a lovely time too. And in those times when you spend time with Lawrence, more private moment, it's lovely because he has this wonderful chuckle. He has also a lovely sense of humor.
And if I may jump to your comment, his brain, even though he can't see,
It's
and
good.
his
It's
hearing
your
is
turn
bad,
soon. It's your turn soon. Get back to
his memory is
It's good.
pinpoint accurate.
I know, it's not, but it's your turn soon. I'm
Because you're
speaking.
cute.
Yeah. That's how we are when we're at Lawrence. You all sort of, well, not all. It's Jack and I in unison. And Lawrence, anyway, if I can, now I lost my thread, my thought.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I should bloody well think so. Yeah. However,
Why I didn't put them together, you notice.
very smart. No, but actually, this is what Lawrence really enjoyed. This was around the dinner table when everyone was actually discussing things and disagreeing, and then you still liked each other when you left, and I think that's the best way to be. Don't you think, Jack, that's the best way to be?
Yes.
You had to agree to disagree. Anyway, I adore, actually, I've come to adore Lawrence over the years. I find him so tender and very, very loving, and it's become more so. Because when I first met him, I thought he was actually a little bit stiff, to be honest with you. And I come to really appreciate this very tender side of him, and the humor as well. Voila.
And she said, just in a little asterisk, he adores her food. He's a very good cook, and he adores her food.
He adores me. Joke.
One little thing Aggie mentioned politics, and Jack in his poem. Lawrence used to say to me, "What are you and Hirschman doing there in the cafe? You're leisure class comrades." Yeah, that's what he'd always call us, leisure class comrades. And the other thing I want to say, about a year and a half ago, I mean, I hate to admit it, but I'll admit it. I mean, I have my archive at the Bancroft, and I was doing the second sale to them, and I saw I didn't have a lot of signed Ferlinghetti, and I wanted to see Lawrence anyway. I hadn't had dinner with him for 20 years, and we had a couple of falling outs over little things, and there was some Israel thing, about all that, and I said something like, "Can I help it that I had a grandmother who used to carry a little blue box to redeem the land when I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And she was from Russia, and she didn't know the Arab from this, from that, you know. And at any rate, I tried to explain that, but we got back to be friends, but they said, sure, Jack and Aggie will arrange a dinner. This is about 1.5 years ago. And I so much appreciate that. And we came over, and he hadn't seen my partner for 20 years. And he said, oh, Jesse, it's so good to see you. And Jesse was so excited because his eyes were already going bad. And he signed all these books for me. And of course, I have them. I won't get rid of them. And probably it's very self-serving to say it, but I'll say it. He did a drawing, and he put Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and then he put my name in the hair, and then he said, for Neeli, the eternal poet. And I got to tell you, that has, I look at that almost every day. I mean, I don't make to make too big, but still I do, you know. And what Aggie said about him, that sense of, that love that he radiates for people. And I'll say once again, the care he had for the North Beach community. When our mutual friend Jack Mueller died a few years back, he made a statement, there was never a kinder man than Jack Mueller. And Lawrence knew. Lawrence appreciated. Ken Wainio, when Ken died. You know, I always make this joke about Jack, and I'm sitting there and the phone rings. Hello, Neeli. This is Jack. Guess who died? What are you gonna do in life? When he and Shig had the breakup, I was a go-between. Shig is in the Trieste. Shig, come down to the store, and Lawrence would say to me any minute, he's the major domo. He's really in charge. Why can't he understand that? He had a heart attack. I want him to be okay. And he even owned part of the business. Lawrence had given him, like he did to Nancy Peters. He gave.
He does a good Nancy Peters too.
Yeah, what?
You do good Nancy Peters.
Nobody, yeah, I know, but I don't want to. Okay, I'm going to do a Nancy Peters. Oh, Neeli, you must submit some of your little lyrical poems for possible consideration in the City Lights Review. What are you going to do? Anyway, so with Shig said, he explained to me one day in the cafe, a whole group of us, he said, I'm from a samurai tradition and I've been dishonored. There was nothing Lawrence could do. And then Alan comes in town with his backpack and he's having his jelly roll and cappuccino and he's trying to figure it out. He's going to take care of it. And because he was staying up at Shig, he got nowhere. He couldn't go. I went an inch, Alan went half an inch. And Lawrence just, you know.
What was the problem? Yeah.
The problem was that Lawrence wouldn't let him manage a store. He had Joe Wahlberg and Shig was the guy they arrested, you know. And Shig was with him from the beginning.
Yeah,
And
from the beginning.
he was there from the beginning, and so that was the story there. There's one other Lawrence thing, but Lawrence is tangential to it in a way. But one day Ginsberg called me up, and this is back in the day when the Savoy Tivoli was there, and he said, I want you to come by the Savoy tomorrow night at 8 p.m. and meet me. And I said, oh, wow. Alan's going to ask Lawrence or New Directions. This is what I was saying, to do a book. I said, oh my God, how wonderful. So I come there the next day at 8 p.m. and Alan is extremely officious as he could be and professorial. And he says, we have to do something about Gregory. And I'm like, wait, I know. What? He said, we have to have him submitted for 10 days observation. And I know that you were born in California. You can sign papers. with 3 other people, and I thought, oh no. I'm going to go down in literature that I did, you know. So I said the only thing I could say. I said to myself, we'll go to the Beatnik Mandarin. So that's what I was thinking. So I said to Alan, well, we'll have to see what Lawrence thinks of this. And that just seemed to end it right there. Because Lawrence was, despite the fact that Gregory broke the, he broke the window once of the store. And he got in and he stole $300.
That's right. And he said it was part of his royalty money.
And I'd been with him that night. I'd been with him, but I'd gone home. So in the morning, about 5 a.m., I got a call. Hello, Neeli, this is Joe Wahlberg. Were you with Gregory when he broke in? I said, what? That's the first I heard of it. No, I certainly wasn't. He took $300 and fled town. And so, about an hour later, hello, Neeli, it's Nancy. And as God is my witness, another hour, it's Lawrence. What did Gregory do? So there you are. Beatnik hijinks.
Wow. So I'd like to open it up in a second to folks that may have questions. Now consider, the 4 of these folks know Lawrence Ferlinghetti probably as well as anybody other than his kids or something. But this is a great opportunity to learn some magnificent things about a great man. So if anybody's got a question, maybe you could...
Yeah.
Yeah. When was Lawrence in Nicaragua? Do you remember the month and the year?
83, we were there in November. October and November, and then the book came out about 3 months later.
That's right. That was during the U.S. invasion of Grenada.
Well, we went down,
That was early.
Gary Snyder was supposed to go with us.
Uh-huh.
Was supposed to go. And no one, his mother was ill, so Lawrence asked me to go. And I thought, this is fantastic. So we went down to Miami, and this friend of mine picked us up, and he said, in this convertible, Tom Kolerat, who was later a Czechoslovakian prince, but he's a cameraman I've worked with before. He picked him up and said, hey, Lawrence, you want to go for a ride? And we just went about 400 miles an hour to his place on Miami Beach. And then the next day we went down to Nicaragua to see Ernesto Cardenal.
Yeah.
And City Lights had just published a book called Volcan.
Uh-huh.
And so Lawrence took a box, and Ernesto met us at the airport.
Right.
And at the walls in the airport were 23 photographers who'd been killed.
Wow.
With their names right on the wall. I'm thinking, oh my God. So we get in, and everywhere we went, because we were with Ernesto, who was the Minister of Culture, there, if we came to a bridge, you had to stop before the bridge, and the boys would go out and check out to make sure it wasn't bombed and all this. And so, but every person, every one of the junta, all 7 of them, came to see Lawrence one at a time. And every one of them wrote poetry.
Wow.
And so, and the last one was Danny Ortega showed up in a Jeep driven by himself at night. But we were in a San Francisco house, and we were locked in at night, and a guard in the front door.
Wow.
And so, that led to drinking a lot of beer. A little nerve-wracking, they lock you, but that was, we were there for 7 days and went to prisons and...
So Lawrence wasn't there in January, February 1984, was he? No?
No, I don't think that's when we were there.
Okay, because I seem to have a vague memory. I was there,
Uh-huh.
a Sandalista, right,
Yeah.
volunteering with the work brigades. And I remember an evening outdoor event.
There was one.
In Managua.
Yes.
With Father Cardinal.
Yep.
And I'm quite positive.
Is that what it was?
Lawrence was there and reading.
Well, he gave
It's gotta
that.
be January, February.
Well, he gave to Cardinal a seed from Pasternak's grave while we were there, and that was. But we went to Writers and Poets Union, and they had no paper. They hardly had pencils.
Right.
Their photographers had no film, and it was right after the earthquake that had knocked out the big hotel there, the International. But but Lawrence was nonplussed by the whole thing. He was like a complete perfect reporter.
Amazing.
I mean, seriously, Hunter Thompson was just like that too.
Yeah.
Completely a reporter, taking in whatever came by without making any judgment at all about anything, but always with a wry sense of humor about what we were doing, And,
It does start that.
yeah, so that, but you were there.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm wrong on the month.
Because of the U.S. invasion of Grenada.
You
I'm so
remember
pissed.
Lawrence being there?
I really think
Yeah.
so.
Oh, yeah.
I was trying to find out.
Well,
Yeah, it
then
was,
I'm wrong on
it
the
was
month.
like one of those electric evenings and with Father Cardinal, and
Yeah.
I think I was more focused on Cardinal because, you know, I'm in Nicaragua,
Yeah,
there's
sure,
their culture in this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So then the book came out, it's 7 Days in Nicaragua Libre. But everyone came to see him. I mean, everyone wanted to talk to him. Because all the members of the Junta were poets.
Right.
And-
And if I think hard enough, I might remember the poem that Lawrence read, because I think Father Cardinal, a Catholic priest, was a little, you know, sort of a little embarrassed. I think there was something about nudity or something like that. In Lawrence's poem, there was some kind of little funny but humorous and you know and lovely back and forth, you know, about
Well,
that. But maybe Father Cardinal.
Cardinal would show up in the morning at about 10 o'clock. He'd already had a couple of swigs of rum.
Yeah.
He never took his beret off, and we never knew where the hell he went at night.
Right.
And then all of a sudden he'd show up the next day at 10 o'clock. And so we went to, so we flew in this Russian helicopter to Salintanami, which is now his gorgeous little church with
Wow.
metal.
Our work brigade was
Yeah.
there.
Oh,
for
it's
that
like
week
that.
at Salintanami, yes.
So, but, yeah, I mean, it was always fun. I mean, it was fun even in the middle of a war zone, Oliver North, sending bread, you know, like Contras all over the place, but Lawrence made it fun.
Yeah.
That's his style.
Wow. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
A couple for Neeli. Well, I thought Lawrence was adopted.
Well, the Bislins, remember I said the aunt took him to Strasbourg?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that was a formal adoption, to be honest with you, but the aunt took him to Strasbourg, where she came from, and he was there until he was like maybe 5, and then she came back and got the job at the Bislin home, and that home was later bought by who was the famous guy who was the head of Columbia during the student riots? That's who had it. The wife took me through the place, and she took me this big mansion way up at the top, and they adopted him. He was officially adopted by the Bislin family, and
But they took him on so quickly because Bislin's son had died and his name was Lawrence. And so Lawrence,
Yes, that's right.
they were very happy to have another Lawrence.
Wow.
and do you have another?
Yeah, the other question was, it seems like the two big ones for you are Bukowski and Ferlinghetti. You say it's right, and do you have a preference or why? Those two guys, what do you think of those two?
You want-
Two.
You think both Bukowski and Ferlinghetti?
Yeah, they seem like
Well,
two
yeah, it's
major
interesting.
influences.
Lawrence, you know, Bukowski once wrote an essay. I told this to Alan, and his relation with the Beats was a strange thing because Bukowski was a product of the little magazines in the 1950s, the little poetry journals. This was not Beat Generation, but it was Rebellious. There were all kinds of magazines, and sometimes they were run by very sedate people. And all of a sudden, they were getting these submissions from LA from a guy who's writing about the racetrack and getting drunk and a whore, if you don't mind. That's what he wrote about, and things like that. And they had never gotten anything like that before. And I was publishing a little bit in those magazines. And so, 1965, he wrote this essay, and he said in it, I think I'm drunk enough now to say that Allen Ginsberg is the most awakening force in American poetry, with Howell. Isn't it a shame it's the goddamn fags who have to lead the way? I read that. No, it's the dainty little fags who have to lead the way. That's what he said. And Lawrence, Allen just howled with laughter. And I do have to say, with Bukowski, howled with laughter, excuse me. Many years later, I showed up at Bukowski's. We had had a falling out Seems like I had him with everybody. We fell out for years. He was very difficult to be close to. And the fact that he ended up dedicating septuagenarian stew, but he said, now listen, I'm sending you this book. There's something in it you're going to love and something in it you're not going to love. And I looked in at the dedication, dedicated to Neeli Cherkovski, and I looked at the story. A thinly disguised me with a thinly disguised Harold North sitting in a North Beach cafe jealous of Bukowski's fame. So, but the other thing is about Bukowski, if I would just say, people have, like they have about Lawrence or anybody, you know, they have these notions, you know. I show up with my partner, and I didn't tell him I was gay, and he looks at me in this big house that he had, and he takes me aside. He said, listen, Linda and I are so glad you're with somebody. I hope you guys are staying the night. And we did, and he and Jesse became good friends until we had another falling out. But that just goes to show you. But I don't know what he felt about Lawrence's poetry. He never talked about it. Lawrence sure started talking about him at one point, and he wanted to do a book, and so he did Erections, Ejaculations, and General Tales of Ordinary Madness. And I know a lot of those stories because I'm a subject in some of those stories. So, on the back cover, Bukowski wrote something like Charles Bukowski, hard to define, a madman, a recluse. He wrote it. Bukowski did. And Lawrence got a kick out of that. And of course, it sold very well. And then maybe they published Notes to a Dirty Old Man first. And Lawrence loved those, the rawness of it all. These were too much for Black Sparrow, Bukowski's publisher, John Martin, who published so many books of his. But these were the rougher stories, and so John was happy to get up to Lawrence. And now they're doing everything. You know, they're doing like City Lights, Bukowski cut-ups, or Bukowski on Love. It's like with Rilke. Rilke on Love, Rilke on Hate, Rilke on Death, Lork on this. So now City Lights says Bukowski up the tree, or up the ass, depending on how you want to look at it. But Lawrence admired him. Now, Bukowski would say in L.A., you already heard what the cabin's like. He'd say, I wish I had a cabin in Big Sur, a multi-million-dollar cabin facing the ocean like Ferlinghetti does. Well, quite the opposite. But he did say 30 years ago, it turned out to be true, he said, I bet he sits in the cafe and his copy of the New York Times, he unfolds it, and somehow it looks better than everybody else's copy. And he said, everybody else is in shadows, and there's a light over Ferlinghetti. He said, hell, I don't understand it, man, do you? Well, no, I don't, actually. But again, when you see him walking, one of the keys to Lawrence is watching him walk down the street like he's in Provence. Honest to God. And, he has that poem in Coney Island, The Dog Trots Freely in the Street. His dog Pooch, you remember, Jack? That dog didn't have a leash. That dog would go from Francisco Street up to the bookstore and back again. And he had to run a Big Sur. And Lawrence, and he left him alone, and then finally he died. But, and that's just the way he was, And he let his son grow rather freely as well, And he loved seeing people. I know, I said I'm making a joke. He hasn't published me. He did one poem, blah blah blah. But I know he cares for all of us. I do. I know it. I've had enough. He really does, and it's wonderful. And we're so happy that we have him at 100. We have him to celebrate. Because let me tell you, North Beach has had one caravan of death after another. So anyway, it's wonderful. Yeah.
All right.
Nice.
Of his?
Yeah, because he can read it exactly like Lawrence.
No, he doesn't read it like Lawrence. He speaks like Lawrence.
Here, let me,
Nobody can read a poem like Lawrence.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah, let him read it.
There you go.
You have to read one like Lawrence.
for one of his birthdays, I cut up titles and read them. I don't know, I still don't know what he thought of that.
Just the titles.
But the audience loved it, the people. I'm just gonna read the first part of this. You all have a favorite poem of Lawrence's? Does anyone have a favorite? Can you tell me?
Well, it starts in the eternal dream time.
Huh?
In the eternal dream time.
Oh, wow, yeah. It's not in here. Anyone else? Well, my favorite isn't here either, so.
1,000 fearful words
Oh.
for Fidel Castro.
That's a great poem.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, he's sitting in a cafe or something, right, in North Beach, and he takes it out into the world to Castro, and he's the first person, I think he was the first poet to write for Castro. That's what I think. Because they shared a great love for baseball.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think he first read it at a January 1961 Fair Play for Cuba committee meeting
Yeah.
at the Whitcomb Hotel. And I was there, 16 years old. My father.
Oh,
brought me.
wonderful.
Wow.
Oh.
And
While
that's the
Neely's
first
looking for
time.
something, I'd like to riff on that for a second because you mentioned 16 and I think you mentioned 15 or something. And first time I spoke to Lawrence about his influence on me, I made the comment, I was 14 years old, living in Baltimore, and he turns to a friend and he looks at him and says, I get them all. They're all 14-year-old. That's what I get them. And I can't tell you how many people who walk into the Beat Museum tell us the same thing.
Oh.
You know, I was in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade.
Really?
Yes, it happens
Oh, yeah.
every day.
You know,
The one thing you haven't actually mentioned about Lawrence is painting.
Right.
And painting is actually the thing he loves the most. He always says, you know, if he had his time over again, he would have started painting, and rather than writing. But he
So-
haven't said a word about his painting.
my favorite Ferlinghetti poem is not, like yours, all of it, they're not in here, all three. Yours, and yours. And my favorite is, they were putting up a statue of St. Francis in the city of St. Francis on a little side street off the avenue where no bird sings. And that was Benny Buffano's statue that's now at the Fisherman's Wharf. And the little side street, of course, is Vallejo. So Lawrence loved Yeats, and one of his last poems, Under Bear Ben Bulben, ends with it ends with the words "horsemen pass by." So, but I don't know how I can sustain that voice. Reading Yeats, I do not think of Ireland, but of midsummer New York, and of myself back then reading that copy I found on the 3rd Avenue L. The L with its fly-flung fans and its signs reading, spitting is forbidden. The L careening through its 3rd-story world with its 3rd-story people in their 3rd-story doors, looking as if they had never heard of the ground. An old dame watering her plants, or a joker in a straw putting a stock pin in his peppermint tie and looking just like he had nowhere to go but come island on an undershirted guy rocking in his shorts, watching the L pass by as if he expected it to be different each time. Reading Yeats, I do not think of Arcady and of its woods, which Yeats thought dead. I think instead of all the gone faces getting off at midtown places with their hats and their jobs, and of that lost book I had with its blue cover and its white inside, where a pencil hand had written, "Horseman, pass by." Oh, but I'll read this regular. Oh God. Benny Buffano was about 5 feet tall, and if you'd meet him on the street, he'd say, "Well, I just visited Khrushchev, and I'm on my way to go see Kennedy, and next I'll go visit Mao," and then you'd be, and you know, it's probably true. I don't know. You know, he came down to San Bernardino when my parents owned a bookstore, and we were picketed by the John Birch Society. There were about 30 people outside the store that a communist had come to town to give a talk on art and you know, on his great work. So I got to know him, and this is a very great poem. They were putting up the statue of St. Francis in front of the Church of St. Francis in a little side street just off the avenue where no birds sang, and the sun was coming up on time in its usual fashion, and just beginning to shine on the statue of St. Francis where no birds sang. And a lot of old Italians were standing all around in the little side street just off the avenue, watching the wily workers who were hoisting up the statue with a chain and a crane and other implements. And a lot of young reporters in button-down clothes were taking down the words of one young priest who was propping up the statue with all his arguments. And all the while no birds sang any St. Francis passion, and while the lookers kept looking up at St. Francis with his arms outstretched to the birds which weren't there, a very tall and very purely naked young virgin with very long and very straight straw hair and wearing only a very small bird's nest in a very existential place, kept passing through the crowd all the while and up and down the street in front of St. Francis, her eyes downcast all the while and singing to herself.
I'm just going to read a poem I wrote to last book, Blue Eyes. It's a short poem. It's Blue Eyes. I need glasses. What blue eyes you have, the color of an infinite sea, or a sky lifted from all the corners of the world. The better to see the light, stroll all over the streets, words lifted out of a brush with big hearty strokes. And many times around your kitchen table are spoons in bowls of bon ami and poesy, and hearing your chuckles at the absurdity of it all as you enter the Hall of Fame with humanity and grace remain as echoes within us, whether it comes from your brush strokes or your pen.
Wow.
A little side note, the reason we chose, Brandon and I chose this color scheme is because of Lawrence's eyes. And that's a Christopher Felver photograph that image is based on.
1980.
Jack will go next.
Okay, Jack will go next, and then I'll read a short.
Mr. Hirschman will read it.
This is it's a bit of a story. I was asked to read this at a baseball event, and I said no first to Kim Shuck, who the poet laureate asked me because it is about the Giants, and I'm a Detroit Tiger fan. But I had a chance to read both poems that I wrote about the Tigers. But this is actually quite a good and a very fine political poem of Lawrence. It's called Baseball Canto. Watching baseball, sitting in the sun, eating popcorn, reading Ezra Pound, and wishing that Juan Marichal would hit a hole right through the Anglo-Saxon tradition in the first canto and demolish the barbarian invaders when the San Francisco Giants take the field and everybody stands up for the national anthem with some Irish tenor's voice popped over the loudspeakers, with all the players struck dead in their places, and the white umpires like Irish cops in their black suits, and little black caps pressed over their hearts, standing straight and still like at some funeral of a Blarney bartender, and all facing east as if expecting some great white hope or the founding fathers to appear on the horizon like 1066 or 1776. But Willie Mays appears instead in the bottom of the first, and a roar goes up as he clouts the first one into the sun and takes off like a footrunner from Thebes. The ball's lost in the sun, and maidens wail after him as he keeps running to the Anglo-Saxon epic, and Tito Fuentes comes up, looking like a bullfighter in his tight pants and small pointy shoes, and the right field bleachers go mad with Chicanos and blacks and Brooklyn beer drinkers. Tito, sock it to him, sweet Tito! And sweet Tito puts his foot in the bucket and smacks one that don't come back at all, and flees round the bases like he's escaping from the United Fruit Company as the gringo dollar beats out the pound. And sweet Tito beats it out like he's beating out usury, not to mention fascism and anti-Semitism. And Juan Marichal comes up, and the Chicano bleachers go loco again as Juan belts the first ball out of sight, and rounds first and keeps going, and rounds second and rounds third and keeps going, and hits Pater to the roads of the grungy populace as some nut presses the backstage panic button to the tape-recorded national anthem again to save the situation, but it don't stop nobody this time in their revolution round the loaded white bases in this last of the great Anglo-Saxon epics in the territorio libre of baseball.
Neeli. All right. This is Ferlinghetti at 97. Stumbling down Columbus Avenue to Little Joe's restaurant, where we'd sit right before the flames, Lawrence in Greek sailor cap, my beret folded in my pocket. This is 1975, and there will be a heavy rain soon enough. There is Maria taking orders for lamb chops and lasagna. We place our orders. The older cook will soon return home to Italy. He places his cook's palm over one burner high enough not to burn himself, and the flames rise. Lawrence breaks into a smile and turns the decades into a sentiment of words. The ring across San Francisco Bay, out to the open sea. Ferlinghetti, a woman says, and he answers, "No, I'm his twin brother. The real one is at the bookstore down the street, hiding behind a secret door." The lights go up way on Whitman's cloud, where he continues to dispense wisdom and sleight of hand, while we eat the fire of the years rise and fall. Later we are walking again, and he hands me the keys to his Bixby cabin. No coffee house there, he grins. You have to make hobo coffee over the fire in the open pit. Then he is 97 years old, still the golden glow of a man who landed at Normandy and surveyed the field of Nagasaki. Still he wanders the streets near Notre Dame and hides out in Mexico and asks Apollinaire to join us for dinner. The French poet shows up 41 years later and takes a seat in what is now a vast Mycenaean dining room where Edgar Allan Poe coaxes a raven from the words. A Coney Island of the Mind was one of the books I hid under my notebook in math class. Lawrence is 97. The planet is a few decades older. It is 2016, and we need poetry more than ever in the heartless void that has settled on this cold spring morning. Yeah, we offer gratitude, if only for the cabin and the poetry and the library called City Lights, easily as massive as is the Borges Library, the Library of Babel, endless lunch, endless fire.
Folks, I want to thank everybody. Aggie, thank you. Chris, Neeli, Jack, what a night. Thank you for attending.
Thank you all. We have books for sale downstairs, I think all of us.
If you'd like to
Jack
see,
did, and
if you'd like to see more of this, I have a film that's going to be at the Roxy this weekend. So it does include Lawrence's art. So,
Yes,
Yeah,
that's,
so-
that's a good point.
so
I'm going to rush down if anyone wants, what's it called, Elegy for My Beat Generation. And Jack, your book, let's